Hi everyone, welcome to another G News podcast. Today we are very, very fortunate to have Carmel Sepuloni here with us. She is the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party and the spokesperson for Auckland issues, women, Pacific peoples, and the MP for Kelston. Hey Carmel, welcome to G News.
It is so good to finally get to be here with you to do G News.
It's great to see you here. Now, last night, I know somehow that you saw the documentary Prime Minister about Dame Jacinda Ardern and her experiences as the Prime Minister of New Zealand from 2017 through to her time where she stepped down and a little bit beyond. Today, the day after watching that film, a film that many New Zealanders are going to experience watching, do you have any reflections on that journey and also being quite close to the former Prime Minister, how things have changed in New Zealand and the political landscape since then?
Yeah, gosh, yeah. Lots of feels watching that last night, and a sense of gratitude for everything that Jacinda did do. Also a sense of gratitude for her deep passion and strong sense of feeling and care for New Zealanders through everything we went through. But also the sadness for how she was treated, what she had to endure, not just her, but her family. And I think at one point during the documentary, she talks about the pendulum, and many of us have known of that and spoken of that, I think, in different forums. You know, she took us in this direction. I don't know what left and right is here, but anyway, I'll just go like this. In terms of that sense of kindness, that collectivity, New Zealanders coming together, that unity. And then we always knew that at some point it would swing back in the other direction, because that's what we've seen happen over the course of time. And certainly that is exactly what has happened with politics here in New Zealand and globally.
Yeah. Well, I think we've probably also seen the way in which authenticity in leadership and empathy in leadership was something we used to have. Have you got any comments to make on the style of leadership we're seeing today?
Well, it's the complete polar opposite. It is a deliberate attempt to divide people, to create disunity. I think that works in the favour of the right. And so we're seeing that happen on a daily basis. And it means that, New Zealanders are coming to blows. They are turning around, pointing fingers and asking why one particular group gets something and they don't get it. What is fair and what is not. But in a way that in many ways has selfishness, at the base of that, I guess. And it's not a nice place to be in. I don't think we'll stay in this place. I think that the pendulum will swing back. And when we see leaders like Jacinda and we reflect on what we've had before, we know what's possible. And we can go back to that place where there is unity, we care about each other, kindness is a priority. And I think we will get back there. I'm just not sure how long it will take at the moment.
One of the things that I have seen is that you've been out in Auckland on the streets at protests for Gaza and justice in Palestine. I've seen you on the streets campaigning there for nurses who are looking for safe staffing levels. And I've seen you out there walking and marching side by side with people for pay equity. When it comes to pay equity in Auckland and across the country, what happened when we came up to Budget 2025 and this Project 10 ambush thing happened from the National Party and the ACT Party? And where's it left everyone, and what's Labour's position on that now?
Yeah, sure. It was one of the most egregious things I think that this government have done. No warning, a secret plan behind the scenes to effectively scrap pay equity stealing money from women that would have potentially and quite significantly pushed up their wages to pay for a budget that no one asked for, really. No one asked for $2.9 billion worth of tax breaks for landlords or a tax breaks for the tobacco industry. They were told that their tax cuts were unaffordable, but they went ahead with the full $14 billion worth of them anyway. But they didn't campaign before the last election on the fact that they would be paying for all of these things, some of which they hadn't even mentioned they'd do, by taking money away from women's future earnings. And so it is egregious, and we feel very deeply, I as a woman, but the Labour Party, given our values, our strong connection to unions, and our support always for workers.
Yeah, well, when it comes to workers and Pacific peoples, particularly when it comes to pay equity and these kind of jobs that are involving mostly female workers, so look at professions like teaching and nurses, we're seeing a lot of pressure downwards on their pay and conditions at the moment. Do you think we're sliding backwards when it comes to gender equality?
We are sliding backwards, and in fact, the Gender Equality Survey was released only about a week ago. And in some instances where there's not necessarily a perceived slide backwards, it's just the stalling. And I shouldn't use the word just, it is the stalling. You know, we made so much progress and then all of a sudden we're going backwards or we're not going anywhere. This is not the country that we want to live in. We recognise that there are people in this country that earn less than others, in this particular instance, women. But if we get even more granular on that, we know that new migrant women, Māori women, Pacific women earn significantly less. And so if the unions, if the women's organisations, if political parties like the Labour Party are not going to stand up and fight against this government's agenda, then we could see ourselves slip seriously backwards. And already I think it's fair to say, Gerard, that our international reputation is at stake here. We've been seen as leaders when it's come to women's rights for a number of reasons, and now it's starting to seem like that reputation is at risk.
Yeah. When you spoke there about our reputation on the world stage, we've just witnessed the 80th Assembly at the United Nations, and we've seen other nations calling for the recognition of the statehood of Palestine. New Zealand is still waiting on actually understanding what its secret position on statehood is. And what do you make of the way that whole issue with Palestine and what's going on in Gaza with an unfolding genocide has been handled by the current government? And what's Labour's position on this?
Yeah, I think it shows a real lack of courage and leadership from National and Luxon. But I think that underlying that are their coalition issues that they've been faced with from day one, really. I mean, we've had David Seymour come out and say something that completely contrasts Winston Peters, and then you've got them two effectively arguing in the background, and you've got a Prime Minister who cannot take control of the situation and step up and be the leader that he's supposed to be. And so we end up in this situation where we are, as a country, or we're in a position where we have a government who is not standing up and fulfilling the moral obligation that we as New Zealanders believe that our government has. And they are not living up to the very proud reputation that we have as a country of being a step ahead, or, you know, being out there in front on these issues and standing up and saying that this is wrong and we won't stand for it. So we're not that country at the moment, and it's really disappointing, not just for us as opposition MPs, but I think for the whole country, that New Zealand is not that world leader when it comes to standing up against what is wrong.
Yeah, so backsliding on the role of women, backsliding on Palestinian statehood and leadership, and backsliding, I think, on climate would probably be a fair comment to make as well. So you sit in Parliament, and when it comes to GDP figures, we've just seen GDP backslide a lot further than any of the people that are supposedly experts at forecasting could have predicted at all. And one of the interesting things that's been going on is a kind of a blame game, I think, in the whole arena of economic growth, because the government's kind of tagged itself to this. What's your impression of the way in which we're seeing credit stealing when it comes to something like inflation coming down from a forecast, but we're seeing blame when it comes to any other kind of situation that really affects us, like when GDP is down and it's not actually working out for them?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that they've dug a hole for themselves. Their whole mantra has been growth, growth, growth. And all of a sudden, we're getting a GDP figure that is far worse than any of the expert economists had even forecast. And the only growth that we're seeing is in the unemployment rate and the number of New Zealanders that are moving overseas for better opportunities because they can't find them here under this government. So, you know, I think it is a reflection of the Minister for Finance. However, we can't let the rest of them off the hook. You know, Luxon came into government before the last election, out there flexing his business credentials, making out that he'd be able to run this country like a business and he had the expertise to do that. And now we're going backwards. He's got to take some responsibility for that as well. But also every decision that the finance minister makes has to firstly be supported by the Prime Minister, but also has to be backed up by everyone who's sitting around the cabinet table. So they are all equally responsible for the fact that New Zealand is not getting better. It is actually in a far worse position. And the real issue here is that New Zealanders are feeling it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when we talk about the number one issue in New Zealand, it's the cost of living crisis at the moment. And this government doesn't seem interested in doing anything tangible right now. It's all about, economic growth sometime down the track that won't trickle down necessarily into anybody. It's back pocket, I think, is the term that we keep getting there. But when it comes to what I'm hearing from Labor's saying this government is making things worse. Can you talk to us a little bit about how it's making things worse?
Well, we're firstly making things worse when it comes to the cost of living because they haven't stepped up and responded to the challenges that New Zealanders are faced with. I often go to the supermarkets that are within or around my own electorate. If I go to the one in the middle of Kelston, for instance, I can see the nervousness on people's faces when they are making the very deliberate decisions on what they can put in their shopping trolley and what they can't afford to put in their shopping trolley. Now, some of us are in the fortunate position where that's not necessarily the concern that we have to have going into the supermarket, but so many New Zealanders have that concern. Now, that's not just because of the cost of the groceries that they are paying for. It is all of the competing demands and expenses in their lives that haven't realised or where they haven't seen any relief. You know, their energy bills, their housing bills, their water bills, their rate bills, everything just feels like it's going up. And that this government is simply just out of touch with that reality. So isn't demonstrating any sense of urgency on responding to that reality for New Zealanders.
What I see them responding to is a big circus performance where they put on a high-vis jacket, stick on some kind of like helmet, and get out there with a shovel and turn it over. But what I'm seeing is that these projects are generally old projects that they've put their arms around and said, these are ours now.
Yeah.
And they've been developing this story about fast tracking.
Yeah.
And today I think there was the first fast track project or something, and they're turning the sods again in front of cameras.
Yeah.
And they're also clipping a ribbon, you know, on a project out in Pakuranga this morning, and then they're all shaking each other's hands in front of cameras along with the current mayor of Auckland, who's enjoying some ribbon clipping right now. But the truth of the matter is that this is actually a performance, isn't it, to try and get through a period where the economy has really actually fallen apart and fallen away. And we're seeing low levels of investor confidence. We're seeing low levels of consumer confidence. And but we're seeing this big circus act out there, in front of cameras, like all is well and we're doing everything, things will get right. What do you think about the green shoots narratives you keep hearing about?
We're not seeing those green shoots yet, and I think that's indicative when we look at the numbers of liquidations that businesses are experiencing. We're seeing it with the 6.1% unemployment rate in Auckland. When I talk to my own local business association, then they're talking about the fact that businesses are really struggling. One of the businesses that wasn't struggling when I went and spoke to them a couple of weeks ago was one who moves, people's stuff around the country and whatnot, but they acknowledge the only reason they're not struggling is because the sheer number of people moving overseas and the amount of business that's brought to their moving company. Now, they recognise too, not ideal, however, that has kept them in business, but that's the state of things right now. As for the ribbon cuttings and the high-vis vests, hey, we all do it as politicians. I was doing it yesterday with Kieran McAnulty in West Auckland, where we went out to check the progress of the faux pathway. But what I found when I got there, because I was actually really happy the government had committed to the next section of that pathway, only to get told when I got there, well, the money was put away by the Labour government and it was in contingency. The people working on the project had just been waiting for this government to clear the money so that they had assurance they would go on with the next section. So that was Labour funding, and I'm really proud of that project. However, I'm sure a national minister will be there in February next year to cut the ribbon and to take all the credit for it. But that is the nature of politics in the cycle.
When it comes to Auckland, Auckland's integral to how the rest of New Zealand is going because it's such a big part of the economy here. What are the main issues that you are hearing on the ground that Aucklanders really need addressing right now?
Yeah, the main issues are exactly what Labour has been talking about for months now. It is clearly the wanting real action on the cost of living. It is housing, it is jobs, and it is health. And so those are the things that are of most concern to Aucklanders. I think it's fair to say alongside that, no Aucklander could ignore this. Moving around our city, the transport issues that we face, public transport, the way in which all of that impacts on productivity and whatnot. They are of concern to all Aucklanders. But having a job, given the high rates of job loss, getting access to good health care, given the fact that for many of us, when we try to get an appointment at our GP, it can take weeks sometimes, or many of our people requiring procedures or tests of a certain nature are waiting far too long for those, and then of course housing. People still have the aspiration in many instances, and so they should, to be able to own their own homes, but where they can't, being able to rent and affordable rentals and have that security of tenure so that they're not transient and they have that stability and certainty is a number one concern.
Pacific peoples. What's really important to Pacific peoples at the moment, and what can you do to help them to achieve their aspirations?
Look, I don't want to be repetitive, but it still is those same issues. And even more so, if we look at the unemployment rate for Pacific peoples, it's at 12.1%. 12.1%, that's more than double what it is for the rest of the country. Yeah. And it just goes to show how vulnerable communities like the Pacific community are when the economy is doing poorly, when the labour market is weak, and when we don't have a government that are prioritising jobs for New Zealanders. We know that with Pacific, quite often the reason why they are more precarious or in a more precarious position when it comes to employment is because perhaps lower skill and qualification level. So it means that they are more at risk when the economy is doing poorly and the labour market is weak. And so there has to be an ongoing investment in getting the skill levels up of all New Zealanders, including Pacific, so that they are not in this vulnerable position when we go through these types of economic cycles.
Now, media are singling out one party out of the 6 parties that are in the government at the moment. One party alone is singled out, and there's a nagging or a demand for policies in detail now over a year from an election, but only one out of 6. The rest of them media don't appear to me to be asking them for any policy details. But 1 out of 6 parties, that one we need to see your policies right now. What do you make of the way that you're being nagged about producing policy in a cycle, a 3-year cycle, well and truly before other parties in the past have had to produce any of their policies, and the fact that right now no other political party is getting that kind of focus and treatment from media?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the media, but it's clearly the government as well. And I feel like it's the only thing that they can keep calling for, because we've been an incredibly stable, unified, I think strong voice of an opposition. And so here they are focusing on the fact that we haven't announced our policy yet. Well, we're a responsible political party, and we need to have all of our ducks lined up. We need to make sure that we've gone through the right process for us as a political party, which includes ensuring that our policy council has been able to deliberate over the decisions that need to be made. We need to make sure that we've got all the fiscals in line. We need to know the lay of the land in terms of what the government is doing or where they're going, because otherwise the decisions and policies that we might announce just simply wouldn't be credible. So we will be in a position before the end of the year to make a few announcements. I think that's fair to say, and I think that Chippy has stated that as well. But we're not going to be able to lay out our whole policy manifesto. That is what happens in an election year. This is part of our cycle in forming policies. And as the major opposition party, to retain our credibility, we can't just be making up policy on the hop, because that's not how it works.
Yeah, the pre-election fiscal update, it seems to be something that a lot of parties in New Zealand in previous elections have waited for, so that they can see the books and then refine their policies from that point forward. But we don't seem to, well, when we try to communicate this, what I'm seeing anyway is when Labour try to communicate these kind of points to media, it seems to pass them by, and then they ask the same question again and again and again. And I think we're sort of seeing nagging in a way. I'm just getting a bit tired of it.
Well, I think the media will continue to give it a go. And I think that's what we've seen over the course of many decades. Is even though they know the process and they know the timeline in terms of when Labour will announce policy, of course they're going to keep pushing us for more. We can't begrudge them too much for that. It's a bit cheeky at times, and they know it as well, but they'll continue to try and push us to announce policy, to make commitments, and that's just the nature of things.
When things are going wrong for the current government, the other thing that I'm seeing them try to do is to scaremonger about the coalition on the left, and drive a wedge in between Labour, say, and Te Pāti Māori, for example. We've seen that recently, and these stories, they may exist for weeks when other stories disappear pretty quickly, but this story will sort of grow legs and continue on, this wedge building. And I see it as a media construction more than a reality. What's your view inside the Labour Party about how things really are on the left, and how are you being portrayed?
I see it more as the government trying to deflect away from the fact, or deflect attention away from the fact that they have the most chaotic coalition imaginable, and so they're trying to force attention onto what could be possible on the left here, when that's not even the reality of what New Zealanders are faced with right now. There's not much we can do about it, but we just have to keep reminding New Zealanders that as the Labour Party, we are focused on what we bring to New Zealand, us being an effective opposition, our alternative proposition going into the next election. And that has to be our focus. And that's the same for every other political party. You do not make decisions, a year out or 2 years out from an election on who you might go into coalition with, because then that's conceding that you're not going to have a solid proportion of those votes. No one's going to do that. But the fact of the matter is, the problem is not any hypothetical future coalition. The problem right now is the coalition of chaos that we have in front of us. Seymour, Peters, Luxon not being able to agree on a whole lot of things and contradicting each other at every step.
Yeah, we're seeing all sorts of telling off in public, so we saw Seymour come out and talk about his view on the statehood of Palestine, and be told that's not the government view by Winston shortly afterwards. We've seen Luxon, when there was the tariffs announcement, saying we should go out into the world and be the leader in reforming trade around the world, and then have Winston say, rah, 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 you don't say this, you're stepping out of tune. So I'm seeing those guys not playing together, not dancing like a drunken sailor, basically. Three-legged, out of control tripod.
Yeah, and I mean they come up with statements that are simply ridiculous. David Seymour saying that they are dangerously effective coalition. Well, he's just trying to counter what he knows what the overwhelming view is of this coalition, and that is that they are chaotic, that they cannot get along, that they do not like each other, that they can't make decisions as a result of the disagreements that they are facing behind the scenes, and sometimes not even behind the scenes, sometimes in broad daylight for the whole of New Zealand to see. But then they try and counter that by telling New Zealanders the complete opposite to what is going on. Dangerously effective is what David Seymour says. Well, we all have to laugh at that, because it's the most ridiculous statement that anyone could make.
I laughed my flip-top head off at that one. I just sat at home because I knew he'd lost the argument as soon as he started to try and pull that one. Yeah, so we're seeing all sorts of disharmony being sort of hidden, I think, and we're seeing a lot of stalling on certain policies that the government's unable to deliver.
That's right.
For example, one of the ones I can recall would be the broadcasting side of things. They can't seem to agree about a digital fair digital use bargaining policy. And there are a number of other ones.
There's a lot like that, but I tell you what, it's even just in the body language when you're in a room with them. At the mood of the boardroom the other day, when Nicola was speaking, I couldn't help but look around to her colleagues that were sitting in the room, and there didn't seem to be expressions of support on their faces for their finance minister, who was standing up there and fighting for them as a government. And even a couple of points I saw Shane Jones and caught his eye at some of the statements that Nicola had made, and there was a funny little giggly look on his face because he knew exactly what I was thinking. So the body language, even within the National Party, but especially across the coalition, and the way they feel about each other is really evident when you take the time to look around the room and analyse what is going on here.
Now, the boardroom and the way in which that came out just after the really shocking Q2 GDP figures, and at the same time it basically said, Nicola Willis, you're 13th, you're outside the top 10 when it comes to our business community of handpicked 150 business people. And Christopher Luxon, you're 15th. You're actually outside, and you're the leader. What do you think when it comes to leadership that sort of says? Because it's basically you're sort of well, what I'm seeing is I'm seeing sort of these junior parties kind of running the ship, and you're seeing the major party leadership sort of out of the
Yeah.
picture, and we're also sort of seeing that compared to pretty strong leadership, from Labor, in my opinion, anyway, from Chris Hipkins at the moment. He's substantial. What's your view on leadership in general when you compare the two sides?
Well, clearly Luxon is not popular, and the polls tell us that that is the case. But he's not even popular with the people that he's meant to be friends with. I mean, he came into government, as I said earlier, talking about his business credentials and making it very clear that that is the world that he's comfortable in and that he is a leader from that world. Well, everyone else in that world does not respect or support him, and that shows in the figures that came out in the mood of the boardroom. I have to say, because those GDP figures came out the week before, but I knew, and all of us knew, that the rankings for mood of the boardroom would have been done in advance of the latest GDP quarterly figures. I wondered whether or not the CEOs in the boardroom would be supportive of Nicola and Luxon, or whether they might be out of sync with the economic circumstances and the latest forecasts or the latest numbers that we're seeing through the GDP figures. But they weren't out of sync. They very clearly have articulated through the way in which they've ranked that they do not think that the Prime Minister and our Finance Minister are doing a good job of managing the economy. So they seem to know. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, finally, after everything that we have seen from this government over the last 2 years, including the attacks on Maori, the crashing of construction, all of the people leaving the country, the way in which we've seen pay equity theft, a lessening of workers' rights. The list goes on and on. So boot camps not working, meth in the wastewater up, all these kind of things that have happened in the last 2 years, and the way in which democracy has been treated with urgency and rolled over quite a lot. What do you hope for New Zealand and what we can all become and aspire to in the 2026 election?
Well, firstly, off the back of the list that you've just read out in the conversation that we've had, this is a pretty dire government. I was in opposition when John Key was leading the national government, and we certainly had our concerns about what they were doing at that time, but nothing then compares to everything that we've seen over this 2-year period under a Luxon-led, national-led government. So mostly it's just a really heightened sense of concern for New Zealand and so many of the communities and whānau that are affected by the decisions this government is making. Also, I'm really concerned that if they're allowed to continue on, then the country that we know becomes unrecognisable. We are a country that has communities that are different, and we celebrate that difference. But we have increasingly over the years also respected that difference and learnt to live together with that difference in quite a beautiful way, celebrating that diversity and everything that brings. And it just feels like we're losing that under this government. And so, my hope is really that New Zealanders see this government for what they are and make the deliberate decision to vote them out at the next election, because we don't want New Zealand to become that unrecognisable place, and because we believe in the beauty of this country and the people that live in it, and because we choose for that pendulum to swing back towards unity rather than the division that we've seen under this government, kindness, where we actually do respect each other, and that country who has this international reputation for being the amazing place that we know it has been in the past, and we know it should be going into the future. So I hope New Zealanders choose that at the next election, which inevitably means not choosing National Act or New Zealand First.
Thank you very much today, Carmel, for your comments. They're resonating hugely with me, and I'm pretty sure with most of the audience. And I want to just thank you and everyone in your team who have so far put up such a good show. And let's roll on to that one-term government.
Kia ora.
Welcome to G News, the good news.
Yeah,